So tell me a little bit. I just, I'm so out of so many loops, and
No, that's
so
fine.
it was great to hear from you. And I looked a little bit on what you're doing, and love the conversations that you're having. Um,
Yeah,
and so
that's
you
cool.
were at Bethel, is that right?
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah, about
Okay.
12, 10 years ago, something like that. So a
Okay.
long, long time ago. And I was radically changing in my faith probably even before I got there, or certainly as I got there. And so I was there for about 4 years. And by the end of it, I was like helping them write curriculum for their leadership development program and stuff like that. And I'm like, I don't believe pretty much any of this. So you're left in this place of going, how do I write this in a way that I see it being healthier for someone reading this, but
Right.
not so much that they immediately fire me? You know? So you
Mhm.
gotta find this like shifting slowly, kind of helping people kind of come along, baby steps, you know. So that was a really crazy time of my life, a really fun time, but I was very alone in that process because you couldn't really stick your head above the sand, you know. I mean, it was
Right.
not the environment to do that, and I
Yeah, it's
did,
thick.
and that's why I left ultimately. Is too many people butting heads probably, but they're great. I
Is
love
there
those guys.
an is there a network of people from Bethel who have kind of found each other after a deconstruction out of there? Or
Kind of.
no?
There's some groups. There's some like Bethel alumni groups for sure. Like there's an LGBTQ plus Bethel group, which kind of it isn't explicitly that, but it kind of is, right? Once you start
Right.
identifying and going, yeah, no, this is me. You've probably on some level deconstructed enough that at least you're not Bethel anymore. But yeah, and so that's quite a helpful group for people within that bubble. Beyond that, not really. I'm trying to connect people. One of the things I'm doing is connecting people and creating resources for people to find one another. And so there's a lot more people popping up that have been through that are connecting with one another, which is really great. Yeah, so it's regionally based. So it's kind of like if
Right.
you're deconstructing, you're losing your faith, you're changing your faith, whatever it might look like for you,
Mhm.
you can connect with someone that's going through a similar process. They might not be at all on the same page, but there's something about even when you've come out of something, even if what you've gone into isn't the same, there's a camaraderie there, right? There's a kind of thing of like, well, at least you know what it is to have come out of that concept of
Oh,
Christianity,
for
at least.
sure. No
Um, yeah.
question.
So yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to help people do is connect and figure out they're not alone, because it's a really lonely process for a lot of people, because generally speaking, we're not allowed to talk about this. We're not allowed to, overly publicize, hey, I'm going through this. And if we were, we'd find out a whole host of us are doing it, and often half the church are doing it quite
It's
quietly,
so
or who
true. It's
knows.
so
Yeah.
true. And it's really a change. I've been doing this a long time. And before, it really wasn't as out there.
No,
And
absolutely.
it's amazing what's happened.
Yeah,
And it's, I think it's just going to keep picking up speed, honestly. I
absolutely.
think that it is not going back. I think more and more and more and more people. And eventually it'll be more people outside than inside,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that'll be really interesting to see what emerges from that, because
Yeah.
the structures are still really strong. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I
It's
know that people do feel less alone because there are more people. I was 14 years ago and there weren't as
wow.
many people.
Yeah, no, I
um
mean, I felt utterly alone when I was doing it, and I could like you've got all these different movements. So I could read a Brian McLaren book or Shane Claiborne or some of these kind of like progressive Christians, but that's still in some ways very fundamental in a lot of ways,
mhm.
and it's still certainly within a certain bubble. Or I could maybe explore kind of the Rob Bells that had kind of gone off, and they were like, we just didn't even know where they were at. Although that was
Right.
probably nearer the time. I don't know when he did Love Wins. What was that, like 8, 9 years ago now, or
It's
whatever
been
it
a
was? He kind
while.
of like
Yeah, I don't
stepped
even
out
know.
of evangelical, but everyone was kind of like, well, we don't really know what he's doing, but we kind of like it, so let's do that. So there was a few people that you could go, oh, so there's some people that do this, but you also go, yeah, and they got a farewell Rob Bell. And yeah, they got like, who wants to be treated like Brian McCrown is treated by the evangelical church, right? So there's
Right.
an element of like, I can't even tell people I read his book, never mind that I might think some of the things he thinks.
Yeah.
And so it was really very lonely. So I mean, 14 years ago, I mean, it feels like it's been quite a like almost a logarithmic logarithmic kind of like uptick though, isn't it? It's because I remember when I
Oh,
started
definitely.
helping people do this like 8 years ago was when I started to kind of more publicly kind of helping people on this journey, and it felt like no one was doing it. That's why I did it. I was like, gosh, there's no one doing this, and there's a million pastors for every kind of like million people, it feels like, in the church. But as soon as you start needing some guidance or help or someone to just sit with you when you're coming out of that, there's no one. It just felt
Mhm.
like you were
Oh,
just
it's
utterly
so
alone.
true. Yeah,
And now
it's so
that's not
true.
the case at all.
Yeah, there
Jump
are a
on
lot more.
Instagram and everyone's kind of
Right.
sharing their story and their journey. It's really exciting. Yeah. So how tell me, because I'm not massively familiar with you, I have to be honest. I wanted to read your book before I was off on holiday last week, and I was like, I'm gonna read your book before I get to. And I just didn't get a chance. We were on a family holiday, and it was insane. But the reason I contacted you was because we have so many mutual friends. I think Derek Day had said I had got to have you on. A whole bunch of my audience said, "Can you have Kathy on? We'd love for you to chat with her and pick her brains." And so I was like, "Oh, I need to talk to this person." But I'll be honest with you, I don't overly know why I need to talk to you. So, because I don't know too much about you. I've kind of read some bios. I listened to a couple of podcasts to try and pad it out a bit. But tell me a bit about your journey. So you kind of said you've been doing this for about 14 years. That's like, you're like the old guards in this movement, right? I mean, that's a long
Well,
time ago in this movement, it feels like. So,
yeah, I mean, it kind of feels that way. I mean, there were people before me
of
because
course,
14
yeah.
years ago, when I bombed out of a big church staff, and for me, a big piece of my story is that I wasn't raised evangelical, so.
Mm.
I was my divorced family, adult child of an alcoholic, super progressive, open, inclusive family in Northern
Wow.
California. But it had a lot of complications. And one of the complications was a little bit of a lack of any framework. And so I was looking for connection and family, a stable
Mm.
family and something to belong to. And so I was always kind of drawn to Jesus in a pretty pure way because I didn't go to church. So I never went to church as a kid,
Right.
none of those things. I never went to youth group, none of that. But someone along the line gave me this little white Bible. I still have it in my box of mementos. And I started reading it because I was like a journaler, kind of intense feeler person. And I read the book of John. Someone told me to do that. And it was, someone brought me to vacation Bible school. It's not
Sure.
like I didn't do anything, but it was nothing like caught hold
Yeah.
system wise. And so I was just drawn to Jesus. I still am, that's the
Mm.
one thing in losing everything systemically and tons of theological constructs. There is something for me about the downward ways of Jesus that I'm
Yeah.
personally drawn to. And so it just kind of opened up this connection and it stirred something in my soul. And so that pure part really is kind of I draw back on because
Mm.
it felt pure
Yeah.
because it wasn't system wise. But then once I started going to church, doing the things that good Christians do, learning, discipleship, Bible study, all those things, what I found was things from my family that I had learned to do: peacemaking, be the good girl, say the right
Mm.
things, don't make waves. All that really worked well in Christianity,
Right.
and in fact even better, and so I kind of
Smooth
went.
transition, just straight in there.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was easy. It was totally easy. And so I would say that I really became like a super good Christian woman and
Yeah.
really built a big identity around it. I mean, it wasn't like right away, but I went to a conservative Christian college, even though that wasn't my denomination. It was Church of Christ,
Wow.
Pepperdine, single mom, family, no money, big scholarship, and just kind of in this culture. And, you do that, you adapt to
Hmm.
cultures. And especially when you're a peacemaker, adult child of an alcoholic, used to doing what other people are doing and kind of mirroring that. And so it was really easy for me. It was not hard. And I liked it. I liked belonging. I liked
Mm.
being affiliated with a group. I liked clear boundaries. I liked right and wrong. And I kind of went all in. I always say, I kind of came from this, and then I had my super narrow years.
Right.
And my husband is interesting because he's from El Salvador. So he immigrated here when he was 4. And so came from, his mom had been converted by missionaries in El Salvador. And so it's very a fundamentalist stream, really. And so, but
Sure.
Jose wasn't like that, but he always went to church, like drunk all weekend, crawl your way to church. And so that was a little bit like when we got married, we kind of adopted that same stream.
Right.
And, and really did well at it, to be honest. I mean, we were that good looking kind of Christian family with those little kids dressed cute and going to Bible study and hosting things. And we both kind of bought in. But
Yeah.
the interesting part, a little more for me than him, is that I had something going on inside where I was really struggling with
Mm,
loneliness, insecurity, shame, things that had happened to me in my past, things I had done in my past that were not integrated at all.
right.
And so that split is so real for so many of us. And so really my daughter is 27. And so it was about 27 years ago that things really started happening for me,
Wow.
because I kind of hit this place in my journey through kind of a therapy, not therapy, not Bible study group that a friend of mine who was, kind of ahead of her time was
Mm,
facilitating. And it was where women were being honest about our relationship with God and with other people, and mostly with ourselves. And that was where my true story of my family, my past, like what my doubts, my fears, insecurity, loneliness, all that, I started to tell the truth.
mm,
And when that happened, it was like something opened up, and I started to see that all around me was dishonesty,
mm, yeah.
and that the authenticity that I was experiencing in the group was really healing. It was really scary.
Right.
And I would say back then I was not deconstructed, because I was still in those systems. But
Sure.
something started stirring. And the reason I bring that up is I kind of lived that way for a long time. Every church after that didn't really like us doing that. That church, that group got kicked out of the church for not using the
Right.
Bible enough. We were kind of seen as the touchy feely, oh, when are they going to quit talking about themselves? When
Mm,
the truth is, marriages were saved, people were healing from sexual abuse, passing. I mean, so many things happened in that
yeah.
season. And
Wow.
so my work really since then was always kind of creating those spaces, and with resistance every time.
Yeah.
Every system
There's
did
like
not
a
like honesty.
whitewashed kind of need for a lot of churches, not all churches by any means, but it feels like a lot of churches are quite happy to have the appearance of everything being fine, even if it is detrimental. Like when I traveled and spoke in churches, I mean, I was traveling in hundreds and hundreds of churches meeting. So obviously met loads of pastors, and the amount of people that I would expose to as a pastor kind of go, hey, you kind of see that, like, you're very much restricting people getting better by making sure that there's no room for error. And they would basically go, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
We don't want the error, And so there's this thing of like, if you have a group that's exposing that this couple, there's an affair in that marriage, and then you're healing it, and actually, God, that's wonderful, because otherwise it's going to go to shit anyway, right?
Right,
Um,
exactly.
but we don't want you to bring out the fact, or bring up the fact that this couple, there was an affair in their marriage, and it's not all rosy and perfect, and it's a good family, and like, there's this weird dynamic in the church where we're almost willing to avoid healing if it looks messy. That I've experienced, and I don't know if that's maybe ties in partly to kind of the what do you think it was that the church didn't like about, you mentioned it's like touchy feely, it's a bit emotional, it's not enough Bible based, but I just feels like such a bad excuse, right?
Terrible. It's
Terrible.
terrible, because what it does, and I mean, this is where I still feel more passionate than ever, is that it really creates unhealthy people.
Mm,
And so that are playing a game with real lives, and their real lives and their
yeah.
souls. I mean, so many people I know in evangelicalism that their souls shriveled because there really was not an integration of all parts of us.
Yeah.
And so it really was a split, and it's super binary, it's totally dualistic thinking, all the things that, now is kind of more out there in the world.
Mm.
But the either or and the, squeeze sin out of you, pray harder, trust God more. Something's wrong with you in your faith if you're struggling. And that is just every direction. And then as women, men have their own issues, that the way Christianity kind of frames masculinity and all kinds of things.
Sure.
But as Christian women, I mean, there is zero value
Yeah.
on voice, on strength, on any kind of healthy power, any of those things. And so if you don't play the game well, you lose in that
Yeah.
system. And
Yeah.
people who know how to play it, and I did for a while, I do know how to play it. I could still adapt if I didn't have integrity.
Yeah.
I could just to get more people to know you or
Hmm.
whatever, to play in certain circles. I mean, I refuse to, because it's a bad system. I think it's a dirty, rotten system,
Mm.
and it does not bring forth good fruit and health for the
Mm.
most part. If I knew a ton of like super, really healthy, integrated, um, modeling a whole person in that system, I'd be more drawn to it now. But
Sure.
I just see the opposite all the time. And I
Yeah.
experience that personally. And then, the short story is that I kind of just kept creating those spaces. My master's degree is in organizational development management. And so it's
Okay.
like on healthy systems. And I got that
You just
before
can't not see it then.
I couldn't, and I never really did anything with it. It was a non-Christian thing, and it was at the beginning of my career. And then I got married and had babies and became a good Christian and all those things. And
Mm.
so I went to Denver Seminary working on a counseling degree. Yeah, a long time ago, 2002. And when I did, I realized I'm a terrible counselor too, because I'm not that good at just 50 minutes and that's it. Personally, I love therapy. It's a great thing. I refer people there all the time, but I'm more of a connector to community.
Mm.
And so I did spiritual direction there. I got a certificate there. And right in that time, I got asked by a friend to come on to a big church staff. And what's fascinating about it, and what I like to mention, is that I thought he was asking me if I knew a guy, because
That's
that's
so
what's
funny.
embedded in us.
Right. Yeah.
This is what's embedded in us. And that was now,
Wow.
17 years ago. And I remember him going, "No, I want you to
Wow.
be a care pastor." And I was like, "What?" It was just out of the realm of what I thought. I was
Yeah.
kind of carving my way doing healing ministry in a church, doing the best I could. And so I ended up, it's a long story, but I went on the church staff. It took a year before that all really came together with my family. And I will tell you, it was the beginning of the end for me.
Mm.
And I actually really loved my job, and I was grateful for the opportunity. But I was the only female on an all male team, and I got my voice and I got it stronger. I kind of got in my zone on healing and community. I mean, that's what I have been doing for a long time.
Sure.
And I'll just be honest. I mean, the curtain opened and we saw behind the curtain, and it's a power nightmare, and
Yeah.
it's a misogynistic, unhealthy, disparate, ego driven, money driven, resource
Mm.
driven machine. And and my thing about it was, it's a lot of people on the outside don't know. They go
No.
and they're getting inspired and it feels good, but I know what happened on the inside. I know that what I experienced personally, and what happens to so many, I'm sure, listening, is that once you push on a system, you're out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's
Once
just
you start
it's just
revealing that.
yeah, you're out. And so what was good for me and what I'm really thankful for, something happened in me. I think it was like all those years. So I've been doing 12-step work for a long time,
Mm.
recovery, those kinds of things. And I just sort of, it came together, and I stood on tables and I said all the things that needed to be said about power. It didn't change one thing, trust me.
Mm,
And if people would have looked at me, they'd be like, what in the hell is she doing? Stop. This is they're
brilliant.
not going to change. But for me personally, it was so helpful because I said everything I needed to say,
Yeah.
and then I lost my job. That's what
Yeah.
happens. But it got me out, and that's really where faith shift started. So that
Mm,
was 14 and a half years ago.
wow.
And when that happened, what came out of it is that I realized that everything I believed didn't make any sense anymore. Everything I had submitted myself
Wow.
to didn't matter anymore. And what happens is, this is in faith shift, when you lose your beliefs about the Bible, about the church, about God, about Jesus, about whatever, um, you really underneath lose the structures that support those beliefs, because
Yeah.
structures are built on beliefs. And then when you lose the structures, you lose the relationships that are part of those structures.
Yeah.
And that's a really painful thing. I like my friends,
Yeah.
but you're on
Absolutely.
the out. And then when you lose your relationships, a lot of us lose our identity.
Mm,
And that's what happened to me, is I lost my identity as a
wow.
good Christian woman, as a faithful follower, as somebody who played nice. I mean, everybody liked me a lot more when I played nice. But I will say, losing that identity has been the very best thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is nice to be accepted and loved, but when you are accepted and loved for being something false, there's this, you come home and I often use the language, like, it's not work, it doesn't work as well in COVID world, but when you come home and you take your mask that you've been wearing to church, you take that off, wear masks, people. When you take the mask off and it's glowing with love and acceptance, and you put it down and you realize, oh, the mask is glowing with love and acceptance. I don't feel loved and accepted. And even in the midst of being rejected by the many, because I take the mask off, just receiving a few people's love for being truly who I am now, even if I'm standing on a table going, this whole thing's a sham, right? If only one person goes, wow, you go, Phil, yeah. That is a feeling you can't describe because you haven't experienced it in years. Maybe in a few contexts, in a subcategory somewhere where you felt you could be yourself. But on the whole, within church, you can't be yourself and receive that love and affection, and acceptance if you're starting to wonder about these
Yeah.
systems, question these beliefs, um, and so even if as a painful thing, I think what you're saying there is very true for the vast majority. It's still a beautiful and very exciting and invigorating experience as well, even in
It,
the pain of losing all those things.
Yeah, it really can be, but it's rough. And a
Mhm.
piece of Faith Shift, writing Faith Shift. So Faith Shift came out in 2014, and so it's a big piece. I'm just kind of underground a little bit. I mean, my work has always been like highly relational, intimate, just
Yeah.
not like throwing stuff out to the world. So, but I will say, I mean, it's great to be on this show and share with you, because Face Shift really is a tool. It's a framework to help give language for some people
Mm,
that are trying to find their way. And so there were a lot of memoirs. There were lots of great stories. I was so thankful. I mean, that's how I when we bombed out of big church, we planted the Refuge, which is it's a Christian community and mission center that I co-pastor still. So we've
sure.
lasted, and it is where everybody believes so many different things. I mean, we gather around shared values, not shared beliefs. It looks so different. It's not just a progressive church with a cool little twist. I mean, it really is a whole different system.
Yeah. Wow.
But
And
it's
whereabout are
evolved.
you again?
What'd you say?
Whereabout are you?
We're in North Denver, North
Okay, just
Denver,
for
Blue
people that are
Field.
listening, like there's gonna be
Yeah.
people listening in that area that are like, "Oh my god, yes."
Well, it's a good example. Like, we don't do online church. We don't do those things because it's like we're just more relational, but
Yeah.
we have an open cafe. We do a lot of things in the wider community, and a
Mm,
lot of healing community and opportunities for social action. So it's evolved over the years for sure, because we have,
yeah.
that's a little piece. It's like I'm not the same when I look at things that I wrote or said 14 years ago. They're different from now.
Sure.
But the part that is that it was clear is that there were people out there a long time ago writing books and sharing, and I'm so thankful to have met them. And kind of what happened with me is I I had written a book. I had written a few code books before, but I had written a book called Down We Go in 2010, and it was centered on living into the downward ways of Jesus, and that there kind of was a way to live something else out differently, and it had really extending love and compassion and mercy, and welcoming pain and honoring doubt, and um, pursuing justice, all kinds of, they were kind of eight different things.
Sure.
But what I found in that conversation, I just kept meeting more and more people who everything was coming apart.
Mm,
They bombed out of ministry, they bombed out of church. Their parents were mad at them and scared for them. Their friends were praying for them. And what I kept finding is lots of stories of deconstruction, losing everything, but not a lot on how to not pull something back together, not that,
yeah.
but how to reimagine a new path beyond losing it all.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how Faith Shift came about, because I wrote this series on my blog called Rebuilding After Deconstructing.
Yeah.
And it just kind of walked through some of those things. And it's always danger with this group of people. I know I'm allergic to
Yeah.
most everything. I'm allergic to celebrities. I'm allergic to formulas. I'm allergic to the next best thing. I'm allergic to patriarchy. I'm like allergic to everything. And so I know that this group is kind of like that. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I tried to write something that included a lot of stories, but giving some language. And so that's a piece of Faith Shift, is that it had a faith evolution model, kind of like
Sure.
written. The joke was kind of written on a napkin, not the four spiritual laws, but a different way, and that people could adapt it to what worked for them. It
Sure.
was written in pen. It wasn't a new formula, and it really
Yeah.
just had fusing that, that's part of all of our faith experiences across everybody, and that looks different for everybody, but it's super
Yeah.
linear, and that we long for the values there are certainty and conformity and affiliation, and it serves its purpose.
It
Most
does.
people go through a little phase, I think everyone kind of does, oh, there's my dog, shifting, where it just gets rumbly. You start to
Yeah.
wonder, you start to doubt, you're like, this is kind of dumb, whatever it is, this is something's not resonating. But a lot of people push that down, and then there's kind of returning, like just
Yeah.
never sort of moving into something new. But a lot of us um, have an experience where some kind of thing happens, and shifting evolves into unraveling.
Yeah.
And in unraveling, it is down, baby. I mean, that's
Yeah.
all. It is a free fall. And in there, we kind of, the values are, uncertainty and authenticity and not knowing, and autonomy.
Hmm.
Like, no one is going to tell me what to think or feel, or what my gifts are, how I can lead. Like, it just all comes apart. And then those losing all those four things. At the bottom in Face Shift is severing. And I know a lot of people listening are probably in that place where it's like,
Hmm.
I just can't. And I used the word initially, we changed it in the editing process, but divorcing, that wasn't strong enough, and that's loaded for a lot of people. But
Yeah.
I was really glad the editors kept severing. I mean, it was a deal breaker for me, because
Yeah.
severing is real.
Yeah.
And it's where you just can't, you come away from the table, agnosticism, atheism, and for sure, people who have had spiritual abuse in their
Mm,
story, they have to sever. I tell people all the time, you have to, because you can't like build something on that much
yeah.
toxicity. And so severing to me is probably one of the, without severing in the book, for me, it doesn't work,
Right.
because then it's just another
Yeah.
okay, you kind of lose a little bit and then you can get something back.
Yeah. It's an
And that's
interior
not
design job, not a deconstruction, right?
yeah,
So
and it just
not
doesn't
rebuilding, you're just
happen.
redecorating.
Right. And but what I think what's really important is not everybody severs.
No.
There's total room for me and anybody who does because that's just real life.
Mhm.
But some people don't. I would say I didn't all the way sever.
Yeah.
And then kind of the last one is this big messy, spirally on the other side. And I changed the language in the book is rebuilding,
Mhm.
and the values there are free values of freedom, mystery, and diversity. But I would say this, this is what happens. You kind of write something and then your life changes or you just are around more. And I wouldn't use rebuilding anymore. I would say reimagining.
Mm,
And that looks so different for everybody. I mean, some people
does.
still call themselves Christians, some people don't, everything in between. But I think the part that I love is that there really is life on the other side.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't include really any of the old things, and it can. I mean, every person is
Sure.
different. And
But it
one of the
doesn't
things,
have to. Yeah.
it doesn't have to. And I think one of the things that really the church has really screwed people up on is it just doesn't give people agency. And so, agency and our ability to kind of own our decisions and make choices and believe some things and not believe other
Mm,
things and read a book and actually go, yeah, I don't, I like that part, but I don't like this part. And we were taught in evangelicalism, you can't do that because truth is truth.
yeah.
And it's really dangerous. And so I think for all of us, our number one thing we could do on the other side of unraveling, deconstructing, severing, whatever it looks like, is get our agency
Yeah.
and quit submitting to new dumb progressive systems that have the same shit, honestly.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying there's not good in them, but we have to be careful if we don't do some of
Yeah.
that work of agency and our noticing our addiction to inspiration, knowing that we really truly want people to tell us what
Yeah.
we want so we can
Yep.
feel better. And that's a form of numbing our pain
Yeah.
instead of just living in the raw thing that we truly don't know. If we're really honest, we're all agnostic.
Sure.
And no one wants to hear it. No one, everyone wants to look for something, that'll we can
Absolutely.
put back together. And I think learning how to just be so wide and diverse and live in the unknown is so uncomfortable, but
Mm.
it's so healthy too.
Yeah. I mean, have you heard of spiral dynamics? You come across
Yeah,
that? I mean,
yeah,
you're
there's a lot
describing
of
blue, orange, green, right? Boom, boom, boom.
exactly,
Um,
totally. It
but
all fits.
and of course within these models of human psychological development there's a lot of overlap and overflow and stuff, and that's something I know when I started doing this maybe like 8 years ago, it's 9, 8, 7, who knows, um helping people who were going through this process. I found myself totally unaware of what I was doing, but people coming to me who were still in that, they question her and they were terrified and they're like, what's happening? And they're having these existential crises. And is there even a God? And my community hates me. But they still are driven by that need for safety, certainty, security. And so they look at someone that's being a bit public, a bit open about this process and sharing or whatever, and they go, you will be my new person that gives me safety,
That's
certainty, and
right.
security, right?
It's
I
so
I
true.
just I wasn't aware of these dynamics early on, and I fulfilled that role, and it took me honestly probably a couple of years before I was like, oh, I'm actually just giving people a new crutch, and I'm becoming the new authority that I shouldn't be an authority. I've been doing this for 8 years now, and I still shouldn't be an authority. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Like I don't know what I believe, and so it's a fascinating component that we still on many levels are seeking that. We can, as we go through these processes of deconstruction, we have to be really careful that on some level, like you're talking about, like we are prioritizing a level of autonomy, of a internal compass that goes, okay, I can look to authorities and go, oh yeah, of course this guy is a biomedical scientist, I'll go to them with my biopsy to ask if it's cancerous. yes, good call. Don't do that yourself, or whatever, right? And don't get your pastor, right? but so there's but I am the one that's sitting here with autonomy, going, okay, let me weigh up my options. Let me look at different people. Let me evaluate who's a good source, who's got qualifications in this area, and it is a very internal thing. Whereas before it was, oh, the guy with the big book who told him that God said this, and everyone else agrees, so I'm just going to look to that person and take it whole, sale, just, yep, okay, hit me.
Yeah.
And it's a real danger of us looking for new people, and I see it again and again. But the danger I see, and I'd love your thoughts on this, because I'm sure that on some level you were aware of this and trying to be intentional about this as you're writing Faith Shift, because it sounds like it's an intentional component within it, is I see a lot of people writing books on reconstruction. And I think I have nothing against reconstruction at all. I really believe that once we've deconstructed things and once we've kind of tore apart what we had built before in our lives or what was handed to us, there's a component of, as we move forwards, we will always be building new structures to work within, to use, and beliefs to believe, but we'll probably start deconstructing them and then building something in their place as we go. The danger I see is a lot of people, probably never, if ever, it's like 1% of the time, people taking advantage. So it's never intentional. I really don't believe it is intentional. Maybe again, very small percentage, taking advantage of that need in people to find an authority that will tell them what to do now. So it's like, oh, I've deconstructed, let me tell you how to reconstruct. And my problem with reconstruction on some level, and it might have played in even maybe in your concept of rebuilding, is there's this concept of I'm going back to what I took apart and I'm doing it better. I'm doing that same thing better. I'm reconstructing Christianity. I'm rebuilding my faith in Jesus, or my faith in this type of God, or in this, and it's very prescriptive. It is oh, you deconstructed this and this about Christianity, so now you can rebuild this and this about Christianity. There's not a room for you to go, well, actually, you might not like Christianity at all anymore, and that's okay. It's too toxic for
That's
you.
right.
Your experience of it was too much, that you're going to have to explore God in a different, new, fresh way, whatever that looks like. Was that something, as you were writing Faith Shift, you were kind of aware there's a real danger of me being over prescriptive? There's a danger of me, um, again, not intentionally at all. I don't think anyone does it. I know I didn't do it for the few years I did it. There's a danger of me almost telling people what they should believe or how to believe or what core values they should pick up and run with. And that people may well, a good portion of people will just go, great, a book tells me what to do now. I'm fine. And actually you're holding people back from growing rather than facilitating that growth. And if you were aware of that, how did you go about it? Or maybe there's some lessons learned there where you didn't do it as well. I don't know. But
Yeah,
do you
well,
have thoughts on that?
yeah, it's super interesting because I tried to go with what I'm allergic to
Mm,
personally. And so I can't do prescriptive in general. I just can't. And so, and at the end of the day, I mean, I still consider myself a follower of Jesus. I do co-pastor and facilitate space and do things for growth, in our
yeah.
community. But I don't believe so many of the things that I used to believe. And I mean, there's so many things I don't know. I mean, I truly don't know. And so the danger is to go, but we still know this because
Right.
we don't. And so, but I think what we can do, and I think the framework and where, kind of the way that Faith Shift was written, and the biggest section is on the pain of unraveling. So it's like kind of divided in thirds. So the first third is just honoring kind of where we've been and some of the things related to shifting and
Mm,
returning. Then the middle is really all about the pain and blood and guts of unraveling because it's a really brave thing to do.
yeah, it is.
And I think what's really important is that that shifting is one thing. So shifting has it's just like tweaking a few things is one thing, and lots of people do it, and that's really not my zone of just tweaks.
Yeah.
And so unraveling is out of our control.
Yeah.
It's beyond us. And so really I wanted to start the book there, but you had to provide some context, but it's like it's beyond me. I mean, I can't go back if I tried. I couldn't
Yeah.
adapt if I did everything I had in me to do it, because I don't believe those things. And
Yeah.
I believe in inclusivity, and I have a lot of questions about the Bible. I think the whole container of Christianity is really jacked up, on and on and on. There's a lot of things I just couldn't like put myself back in.
Mm.
And so unraveling is beyond us. And then the last part, there's a piece on severing. The last part is really on, again, I would change it. It's rebuilding. That was a
Sure.
long time ago, but it's was reimagining. And so what's there isn't prescriptive, because it looks so different for every
Mm.
person. And we've got to understand that. I mean, this is a huge part as we look around and we go, oh, they became Episcopalian. Let me do that now.
Yeah.
That's more inclusive, and it looks, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can be a
Yeah.
great thing for a certain person, but it's not what everybody should do.
Yeah.
And what all of us, in my opinion, should do is consider how, if we want to, so some people don't, and no
Yeah.
problem. You're going to be fine. That's my opinion. You're going to be fine. It's just going to look different. But I do want to acknowledge for the people, I say this in Facebook, if you're done, like, don't keep going in this book,
Yeah.
because it's okay to be right where you are. And I know plenty of people who stopped there. They might have picked it up later. They might have never come
Sure.
back. But reimagining is for people that do feel that longing and that
Yeah.
stirring for spiritual things. They do. And, I couldn't turn that off. If I tried, I tried to be a bunch of different things. I explored a
Mm.
bunch of different things, and that's just not me.
Yeah.
But I think over here in reimagining, some of the things are like honoring what we've lost, huge piece. We all lose so much. And then celebrating what was. I mean, my past wasn't all bad. There were
Mm.
things that I'm thankful for. There's a lot of toxicity and bad things that really, damaged me, but there were positives too.
Yeah.
Community and knowledge and desire and the downward ways of
Mm.
Jesus for me, even though they didn't really teach it, I did get that. And then, discovering what remains. And that looks different for everybody. And so discovering what remains for one person might be Jesus, and for another thing that there's love in the world.
Yeah.
It looks different for every person.
Yeah.
And then finding, this is a really important thing, is finding what does work.
Mm.
And, we were taught in evangelicalism and certainly fundamentalism, no, this is what works. Bible reading works, and,
Right.
going to church, right? Worship works, prayer works. No, there are so many spiritual practices that
Mm-hmm.
are way beyond, Christianity does not have the market cornered on growth in the world, and so creativity and expression, for sure. I kind of group things into love and beauty and justice,
Mm.
because I think that people really are drawn to those things
Yeah.
in different ways. And those to me are soul practices that are, I would call them spiritual, but you can call them whatever you want. They help us
Yeah.
move in the world and become and heal us, and it's outward
Yeah.
also, because I'm not really into just inward. I think inward is helpful and we need to do that work, but it really is so that it's flowing out of us and we're constantly growing. Igniting passions. I mean, for a lot of us, we just were, if it served the church, if it served the system, do it. But
Yeah.
anything outside of that, it's off limits. And then just trusting the path. Our paths all look different. There is not one road. And it's a wide, open space. That some of us want a road, and if some of us choose a road, we're not bad people to choose a road. I felt that sometimes, and I always wonder, people listening, because I am still pastoring, I am still in a community that has Christian roots.
Right.
And so, that sometimes those of us who do that are like sellouts, or, and I've had to own, like, this is just me.
Yeah.
But I'm not in that system saying, this is what I know, this is what's true, da 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 da.
Sure.
Everything is kind of my best shot. And I think if you give a bunch of people, this is true at the refuge, if you give a bunch of people a chance to do that together,
Mm,
and we have a really egalitarian, inclusive, like everybody can lead, everybody can share, everyone has
mm,
gifts to bring, a lot of spiritual show and tell, and tons of people who are connected to the refuge don't identify as Christian
mm.
anymore. And no one's like trying to get them to kind of put
Right.
something back together. And we all have something to
That's
learn from
beautiful.
each other. And then we can kind of go, yeah, that was really helpful to me. Or
Yeah.
no, that's not, it doesn't resonate. Learning, I think that's a more important skill to teach people
Yeah, I
is
mean
just
that's huge. I mean, I can't even fathom how to begin. I mean, that's like herding cats in my mind. Um, you know, this is something that fascinates me so much because this is talk about integrating our, our prior stages and things like that, and we talk about maybe like that first stage of finding security and certainty within the church. And a lot of us come from backgrounds where that was really needed. We probably wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't find a very healthy, and again, I say healthy with a lot of looseness to it and a lot of
right.
toxicity hidden away in it. But for where you were at the time, if you come out of prison and through a prison ministry end up in church, that might be a really, really, really great thing. Or if you're an addict and you find yourself coming into an evangelical church, might be a really helpful stepping stone on the journey. Might be where you end up as well. That's cool. But there's some components of what church was to us in the past that is great. It really does provide some component of teaching us, of giving us a platform to stand on as we keep moving forwards, whatever it is. And so my point being, there's some of that stuff that we want to build moving forward. I mean, we want some stability in life. Maybe we want some community, certainly community. And
Yeah,
so you
it's a
look
big
at building
one.
community, and this is the thing. So I give you a bit of backstory of how my brain is working on this. Is I had so many people messaging me going, Phil, I'm in Denver. Do you know anyone else in Denver? And I'm like, yeah, I probably talked to a few people. I can't think who. Let me get back to you if I remember. But sorry, and I'm talking to hundreds of people a week, and I spend all my week talking to people online and
Mm.
chatting with them about their journeys. But I can't remember. And then someone's like, oh, what about in Paris? Or, do you know anyone in London? Do you know someone in Chile? And I'm like, yes. And occasionally I'd be able to connect a couple of people, but that was about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a website. And I was like, this is it. Right, Kathy, I'm about to solve the world's problems. And so I'm going to make a website. It's just a big map of the world, a Google map. You log in. It's private for just people that are logged in. I'm going to kind of assume most people aren't terrible. And you put in your city, your country, your name, and that's it. And then if there's other people in that city, you can see each other and message each other. And I was like, I've done it. Right? Because this is the biggest, fastest moving spiritual movement in the Western world. Is people coming out of church.
Right.
It's the fastest moving. It's over 2,000 people a day coming out of the church in America that still hold faith of some
Yeah.
sort of spirituality. That's crazy, and yet we can't find one another. And I'm like, this is going to be great. So if people join here and there, and it's mostly my audience that are, because I don't have a huge audience. I'm like you, I work very relationally. I sit and message people all day, and I'm not growing some huge thing that's not interesting to me. And what I found is that I had someone message me at one point and they're like, hey, Phil, I'm in LA and I was on your website and well, on the Deconstruction Network. And I've found there's like 18 people in LA and this is amazing. And I messaged them all and none of them are really where I'm at. And I'm just like wondering if you know anyone else in LA. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so it suddenly revealed to me that I haven't, believe it or not, I didn't actually solve the world's problems. But it's this thing of like, we still, on some level, again, this might be an early stage thing. Maybe as we mature, we become a bit less black and white, dualistic about this approach. But on some level, if you start deconstructing, you still, as a community, your idea of a community is, oh, but I want to worship together, or oh, I want to pray together, or whatever. And then you get together with 5 other people that are deconstructing, and they're like, oh, I hate worship music. It's just
Mhm.
disgusting. It triggers me. I just don't get it. It's not interesting me. And another one goes, well, I'm not interested in prayer. I don't even see God as a person, you could interact with on that level. And another person going, why are we in a building? I want to be in nature. And you suddenly realize, God, this is going to be a lot of hard work having some form of community here, because if we're going to
So
be
true.
intentional about this, so all that, I'm just building a kind of a picture for you of where I'm coming from when I ask this question. How the hell do you go about doing that? Like, what are you doing at the refuge that is working? Because I am like, I had another pastor on a month or so ago, a guy called Ollie Hall, and he's in the UK. And he managed to deconstruct and bring his church with him. Like, I mean, I think he lost like 4 people in the entire church, and I'm like, whoa, this guy, look at this guy. But I mean, he's in the UK, it's different. I mean, he's a very different person, different thing. But you've obviously started something. You're in the midst of something that is working for people, and some are going, I'm not really engaging with God like that. And so, do you have practices that are occurring that some people don't like, some people do? Like, how do you go about like
Oh,
gathering?
it's so hard, but we're doing it. And we've evolved. So it's really important. And so when we started, I came out of a mega church. I mean, there were 4,000 people there. And so I think people initially thought that we were going to be like a mini mega church.
Right. Do you
You
bring your
know,
smoke machine with you? You know.
no, we didn't, but people wish we had, but we started at the very beginning with, I remember this so clearly, like a whole bunch of people came at the beginning, and then we had everybody at tables to
Mm,
discuss. And then half the people came back the next week. And then we did something where everyone had to take off their shoes. It was kind of this, just more vulnerable. And then half the people didn't come back again. And I came from recovery. That was my work, is in healing ministry and creating spaces for healing. The 12 steps
mm,
work. I really do think the church, could learn a lot from it, but it doesn't want to. It doesn't
no.
want to, because recovery on the whole, healthy groups, I have a really decentralized leadership. Everyone's equal. Anybody can lead. And you have a wild amount of diversity in the group
Yeah.
around a shared issue,
Sure.
getting sober, breaking unhealthy patterns of codependency, any kind of addiction, so that's a piece. Is it does have, it's not way out there. It kind of
Sure.
has a goal.
Yeah.
And but what's interesting about it is anybody can share, anybody can lead. We how do we grow learning and sharing and listening to others experience strength and hope? That's a huge piece of recovery, and it's always unplugged. It's never charismatic. It's ugly, kind of. Usually it's not in a pretty room, it's kind of bad coffee and just weird. It's weird, to people who are used to comfort and pretty people.
Yeah.
For me, that's a huge sign of something. And it's a problem that I see kind of in the progressive movement and Christian celebrity culture,
Yeah.
is that, we just have a value on pretty people, and it's
Hmm.
wrong. And
Yeah.
it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
And so what you see in most recovery groups is just a wild mix of humans and struggling humans.
Yeah.
And so we built the refuge on that ultimately. And we went through a lot of things. I mean, it wasn't like what we are now and what we were then are two different things. But what I say we are now, we've been this way for quite a long time now, is that we really framed ourselves as a Christian community. In that community, we're not, when people say your church, I really go, be careful of that, because we really are a Christian community, because people expect a certain thing.
Right.
And a mission center, which I'm not, none of us were crazy over the word mission, but it helped people understand in the wider community that
Right.
we were a source of help and support. And so what we kind of
It's so
have
frustrating
done,
when all your words get ruined, right? I mean, it's
it's
like,
so hard.
I don't have any
Yeah,
more words left. They're all
I
triggering. They're all
know.
broken. They've all been co-opted by Empire or whatever else.
It's so true. I mean, this is years ago. I wrote a post on my blog called "Why the Word Missional Bugs Me." I mean, I hated the missional movement and the way that they were framing it, but I like the idea of
Sure.
incarnational work, but people don't like the word incarnation. So it's helped us. But what we have created is a hub for healing community and social action.
Mm,
And so anybody can play. Anybody can play. And what playing looks like is we have some people who come regularly to almost everything we do. We have a schedule over a month instead of a week. The pandemic, it's fascinating. I mean, it just hasn't really hurt. It's hard because we miss in person, but
sure.
we're used to being not relying on that.
Right.
We're used to just coming because you want to, not because you
Yeah.
have to. And so we've got a mix. And so, like, what's fascinating about us is we do have a dinner church. It evolved. So our Sunday night, it's a Sunday evening, super conversational. It is the one place in the refuge where we try to use the Bible. There's some singing, there's communion and prayers of the people. And so a lot of people don't go to that. That's just not, but some people do.
Sure.
It's a place where we have our kids. And I met our kids pastor at the refuge through my blog years ago on a post
That's
that I wrote
funny.
called Jenga Faith. And, how many pieces can you take out? And so she came, and she's a therapist. I'm really grateful for her, because our kids stuff is just, it's just wide and expansive. It's just similar to
Mm,
the other refuge culture. And so, but there are a lot of other things. So we have nature heals. So we have a whole bunch of people who just, that's where they experience soul connection with
sure.
God and themselves, and even with other people outside. So we have that. We have a free cafe. And so a lot of people just drop by just for connection. That doesn't have anything, like there's no, there, most everything doesn't have Christian language in it.
Yeah.
What it does have is, I would say, Christian love expressed.
Right.
And so, but there's a lot of other faiths that have the same love. It's not
Absolutely.
exclusively
Yeah.
Christian.
And
I
there's
mean,
a
I'm
lot
in
of
the,
Christians that call what they're doing love, and you don't have any of that.
no, yeah. So I mean, that's the part, is like, I just would call it love. And I'm in the multi-faith, I'm in a multi-faith group. I've been in the group for years, and I adore that group. It's amazing.
Mm,
It's amazing. And I always joke, I'm like, all of us have our same problems. All of us are giving our best shot, but our common ground really is, and that's a progressive group, because you have to be pretty progressive to be there and
yeah,
to hold space for each other. But on the
absolutely.
whole, the common ground is really love and action and justice and caring for the most vulnerable. And, so I'd say the refuge adds a twist of recovery and health. I mean,
Yeah.
people, and I'd love to hear just your thoughts even on it. I mean, people look at 12 steppers as, addicts and burnouts, and
Yeah.
like, I'm not like them. And that is a really sad thing, because that group of people that I'm part of are really the healthiest relationally people that I know.
Yeah.
And we're always looked at in the church. I mean, that's one of the reasons I lost my job at big church, was about this.
Hmm.
And it really is a sad thing, because we don't want to be like that. We don't want to be that jacked up. We don't want to be struggling. We don't want to be hurt. We don't want to have mental health issues. We don't want to use drugs and porn and work and, all kinds of other things. We don't want to food. We don't want to be that person. And so we're trying to manage it. And
Yeah.
really, in recovery, people just go, yeah, that's me. I mean, there's no story in the refuge that we haven't heard. And everyone's like, yep. And there is something really healing about that. But I will say, it's small, it's weird, it doesn't make money. And you can't, uh, it's not a model.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm glad we're who we're supposed to be. And
Yeah.
we've made so many friends around the world over the years. And I'm grateful for all those connections, because it's
Mm,
encouraging. But it's interesting how few people try to build something truly egalitarian, and
yeah.
because it's so messy. And it's why most 12-step group, it's just not shiny.
Yeah. It
And
may,
we have to be careful we're not looking for shiny a little
yeah.
bit. And so you have
Yeah.
to live with discomfort. So if
We
you're
all like a little bit of shine, right? I mean,
yes. And so if you're a deconstructed person, I mean, you're annoyed when someone in the group is talking about this Bible verse that they might be doing. And then the next week, that person who's into the Bible might be annoyed that you're like, I'm
yeah.
so out and I am exploring some of the practices that are
Yeah.
Buddhist practices and finding life there. And you have to hold that all together. And if you do it because you're there for people and
Hmm.
relationship, you can do it. But if you're looking to hear your song,
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna be so mad all the time. But this is
yeah,
the thing. Like, I think it's a really hard thing to. I mean, I have such mad respect and awe just hearing about what you're doing, and Ollie, the guy I was mentioning, and people that are doing something like this, because there is such a desperate need for community in people doing this, um, and we could go down that hole, and I'd love to, but we should probably not move on too fast because there's so much good
stay on
stuff.
topic.
But there's this desperate need for that, but there's so much going on. There's components of people walking through religious trauma. You know, I don't know how much you've gone into like Marley Monell stuff of religious trauma and things like that, but like people like genuinely walking through complex post-traumatic
Yeah.
stress,
Right.
and you throw them in that community and it's going to be a disaster in some levels, depending on what the community's like and how who's there and how is it going to work. And so there's so much to juggle. Every time you think, okay, so we'll do that for this type of person and we'll figure out how to include this, and then you just go, oh, well, what about this type of person? Or hey, this person has a whole other hang up you didn't even think of, you know? Like, and so it's so amazing to hear about communities that are figuring out how to bring people in. And I think that that's a really great insight, the concept of, you know, like 12 steps. You can look at a 12-step program and you can have a homeless single father, and you can have a big business entrepreneur, runs his own companies, successful family, everything's just right. You know, you can look at all these different things that we might see in society and go, oh, well, they're like, you know, they're just totally falling apart. They're wrong. They're whatever. And someone that's like, oh, you're amazing and you're whatever. But actually, it's this level playing field that suddenly comes into place. And actually, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter who's who. You both have something to bring, and you both have an issue that you're trying to, you're gathering around and moving forward with. And I think that's really insightful, the way I've never thought of that kind of concept of, is that how we do community moving forward? Is it less about, and I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, I guess, but is it less about our beliefs and is it more about a common value of, we are coming out of something, and our common value is we're moving forwards in X, whatever that is, right? Because I'm sure that you could even be different in that, right? Some communities would go, we're moving forward in love. Like, we're just all about love. And we're just going to, as long as we're loving people, that's fine. But even that's complex, right? Because, I mean, you get the Westboro
Right.
Baptist Church
Yeah.
say the same thing, I'm sure, you know?
Right.
But I don't want anything to do with that love. And so it's still very murky and complex. I guess what I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, and I think it's so, it's just really, it's so refreshing to hear, because I have a lot of people come on the podcast, and I love everyone I have on the podcast, but there's very different opinions on these things. But it's so refreshing to hear someone going, this isn't a model. Of course it's not a model, right? This is going to be different for every person that tries to do this. It's going to look like whoever shows up, right? On some level, it's going to look different if the meeting is full of 20 people that look like this and 5 people that look like that. And, you know, it's going to be different. But I'd love to know, as we look forward, right, and we're seeing, gosh, we're getting to the point where there's more people coming out of church than staying in,
Right.
and certainly more than are coming in, right? Because that's shrinking as well, and we
Oh
should
yeah.
talk about that. But as that shift is happening, there's no question that people are looking for new ways to do community, because they do want that. They want to have these tight knit communities, these communities where, oh, I've just had a kid or I've had an operation, and the community's like, well, we'll put together a food rota and we'll cook for you, you know, and we'll help out, or whatever it is. You know, these are simple things that the church kind of does really well on some levels, right? If you're on
Right.
the in crowds and you're in the right,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. Um, as we're moving into that, you know, I know that you're aware that what you're doing is not the model. It's not the way that everyone has to copy. But what do you think are some major pitfalls that you've kind of come across over those years? You've kind of shifted, you've changed. Do you think that there's things that, as people are looking to build communities in their own areas, that while there isn't a model of what's right, there are certain things that are most certainly wrong? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, oh, it's always learning. So, I mean, I would say that that's probably the biggest thing, is just being willing to evolve. So, something
Mm,
that could start a certain way with a certain intention, the mix of people who are there then help determine what it becomes. So instead of going, okay, we need all these components in order to be this, it's kind of like, this is the core, and this is, we're willing to change, and we're willing to
yeah.
adapt, and we're willing to let go. I kind of think a piece, you mentioned the with part, and I think that that's really important. This is kind of embedded, this is in Down We Go, and kind of embedded in refuge language, is that there's kind of prepositions, there's doing things to people, and that's super patriarchal, it creates oppression. It's kind of like old school missions, but
Mm,
it's still really popular. And then there's for, which is really maternal, and it creates codependence and unhealthy, all tangled
Mm,
up and and unhealthy reliance and enabling. And that's probably more common. And so this is what happens a lot of times in creating things. I need to make this for a certain kind of person.
yeah.
And we try and use the preposition with,
Yeah.
which is incarnational and equal. So 2 and 4 always is someone's more powerful, someone's under, over and under. And
Yeah.
we just know how to do this. So we know how to lead people this way and we know how to follow people this way. And this is a whole different story and it's really hard to do. But I think it's the, the healthiest expression,
Mm.
if you want to say on earth as it is in heaven, like it's, I hope, I have no idea what it looks like after this world's done, but I do know that this just couldn't be perpetuated forever, and so that there's something about with that I think is the best framework. That's
Yeah.
all. And to
Beautiful.
really get away, I think sharing leadership, everyone's voices, that's why I think recovery is a great model in general. And it's that anybody can play and everybody has a story to bring and a wisdom to the table. And so the embedded in there is somehow listening to each other.
Mm.
And we just have it in us. I mean, we want to listen and then we want them to adapt a little, even in face shifting stuff. You're just like, oh, they're just like a little too pissed off still.
Yeah.
They're
Oh
just a
gosh, I
little.
felt that so much, so guilty of that so many times where I'm just like, gosh, if you were just a little bit less this or a
I
little bit less
know
that.
it's in
Yeah.
us. And so it's a human thing. And so, like, learning to just go, yeah, they are pissed off and they're going
Mm-hmm.
to come over here every single week for a long time
Yeah.
and just hate
Yeah.
Christianity, hate God, hate Christians, hate everything faith. And we're just going to just still hold that
Yeah.
space
Because that's what
because
they
we're,
need right now. They, on
yes,
some level, whether you like it or not, or you would do that or not, or recommend it or not, that's what they are needing to do apparently. So,
totally. And I mean, I want to say something about anger and this conversation because this is a huge part. We were taught not to be angry. We were taught
yeah.
that it was a sin, and women and men too in a different way. But for sure, it was like figure out your anger and move
Mm-hmm.
through it. And we have a same issue with grief, and anger is obviously a part of grief, but it's kind of like, and people have this on faith deconstruction stuff, just get through it
Mm-hmm.
and no, this is our life now. This is our life now. I'm always, I mean, I'm not in the same place as I used to be, but I'm in this. I mean, I am a deconstructed faith person trying to find their way still. And so I'm not through anything.
Yeah.
And this language is embedded in us. So move through your anger, find a way to express it and move through it. And anger, I mean, I have it all the time. And that doesn't mean that
Mhm.
I'm unhealthy. It means that the systems suck
Yeah.
and they harm people. And I'm tired of them harming people. And I can get mad about it. And it's not a bad thing. Now,
Yeah.
do I want to walk around pissed off all the time? No. I want to learn how to release it, but acknowledge it and own it. And at the beginning of the refuge, I was just so mad. It was really the first time I let myself be that mad. And my friend, and he was part of the founding of the refuge, and he's a dear friend, and he was in recovery. We were in recovery together. We met there. We're still like, he's just amazing. And he's been co-pastoring the refuge, doing stuff all these years
Nice.
too. But he was like, Kathy, I'm really worried about you. Like, when are you going to stop being so angry? And this is like 3 months in. 3 months in, and I just went off on him. And I was like, ask me in a fucking year. And, this is the first time I have let myself be angry. And I will tell
That's
you,
so
a
funny.
year later, I was like a tad bit less angry. I mean, but barely. And so I think that we really have to learn and teach people how to be angry better
Mm,
and express these emotions and understand their rhythms. And I hate grief, stages of grief stuff, because
mm,
it really makes us think that it's linear and they're
yeah.
rhythms. And so we touch on them. I mean, some days I do better than others. We've had huge loss in our life. We lost our son last year. It's
Oh,
brutal.
sorry.
And so it's not something to work through and
Yeah.
get to the other side. It is integrating that story into our life. But I want to say something about that because it's really significant. I did not have faith shit tied in to him.
Mm,
And we did not have people at all in our community. We did
sure.
outside a little bit, come in and try and make sense of something that you cannot make sense of.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful. And my husband and I said, because I'm thankful, and this happens to a lot of people I know listening, like you're in different places with your partners. And
Hmm.
that is
Yeah.
rough on
It's
faith
really hard.
deconstruction stuff. And I wasn't. I mean, Jose wasn't as embedded in church culture, but when it started to come undone for me, his eyes kind of got open, the scales fell off, and he was a goner. And we did say we're so thankful that we went through this hard we're going through, but we experienced this hardest thing in this season
Yeah.
where we just didn't have to navigate that.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful. It's helped us so much. And my heart hurts for people who have the
Yeah.
most devastating loss in a system that tries to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Because it's so harmful and it just jacks us
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. I know several people that I've talked to, and I know a couple of people quite close to me that have one form or another of post-traumatic stress because of how they were enabled to go through the loss of a loved one. Especially charismatics, actually, in that there is no process of coming to terms with, oh gosh, this person's got stage 4 cancer, they've got 2 months to live. That's the end of this conversation. I don't have anything
That's
else for
right.
you to hear. And then turning around and going, praise God, God's going to heal this person. I'm going to go talk to Bill Johnson and Randy Clark and whatever. And you know what? I've been healed of some stuff that you can't be healed from. And I've seen some stuff, right? We talked about, I was at Bethel. I've seen some stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know, right? That's on my I do not know shelf.
Right.
But it's not gone, right? It's on the shelf over there. So I'm not saying, people that are terminal don't suddenly get better. And that happens even if you don't have any faith, that can happen. But there's this thing of no permission for you to start to deal with that, right? You read some of these uh, classics like Catherine Singh Dowling, I think it is, the um, the nurse that worked in a hospice and sat with over 5,000 people that died, and she documents like, this is how you sit with someone who dies, and this is the process of people dying. This is what people go through, regardless of faith, regardless of experience, regardless of what's going on. If you find out you're going to die and then die sometime later, this is the process you will go through. And I'm reading that and I'm like, gosh, Christians get to do that in the last 2 minutes rather than do it over
Mhm.
2 months or whatever. In fact, some of us could probably start doing that for people before we even find out they're going to die, because they're probably going to die at some point, right?
Well, you know what's interesting about that is that one of our friends, so this is a good example of the refuge, he was a hospice chaplain for years, and he brought her work to the refuge on the practice of mourning. We
Uh,
did this whole thing, and it was that you don't have to wait until the end to sort
yeah.
out some shit inside,
Yeah, well, she talks about
and
it as dying well, right? And there's this thing
mhm,
of like, gosh, I wanted, like, she describes what that looks like in people that are able to go through those steps and those processes, or at least early on in their stage of finding out, or have done some of them before. And you're like, oh man, I'm so thankful I've come across this. I read it after my mother died. My mother died a couple of years ago, quite young, like late 50s. And it helped me integrate that process, which I think I did
mm,
fairly well with. No one does well with anyone we love dying at all, I don't think.
right,
But I did, and it helped integrate that process to become quite a beautiful thing. Um, and yeah, I can look at some other people in my family that have processed that, and they're still really traumatized because of their faith more than anything.
yeah, so
Um, and it's
true.
really really challenging. And I don't want to say maybe that's not traumatizing for some people. Yeah, it's hard when you're looking on the outside. Maybe that's how people are coping and dealing, and it's working for them. I'm not saying that it's always a negative thing. It feels like it. But I don't want to be like black and white and go, that's that, because I know faith actually does help people. And there's plenty of people in her book that do have faith and die well. um, but it does feel like, yeah, we just aren't doing very well in that area. You know, giving people permission to go through healthy processes. We've got this requirement, right? You believe in healing. You believe in death is an enemy. Or the flip side, I know people that, like, you know, they're, you know, even think of my dad. Bless you, Dad, if you're listening to this. I'm sorry. He does listen to my podcast occasionally. But you know, when my mom died, like that minute, he's like, praise God, she's in heaven. It's amazing. This is wonderful. Now, there was a relief of watching someone die over a period of time that you are like, oh, I'm so thankful that her pain, suffering is gone. But, you know, he's like calling people. He's like, hey, great news. Aunt's finally died. And I'm like, dude,
Mhm.
what the fuck? I'm like, this is not working. And so there's a whole other side of that as well, where it's not just that you're not engaging with, oh gosh, whack my mic, but not engaging with death, but you're over kind of glorifying to the point where you're not able to engage with the actual death itself or the loss, or it's a whole world that just, I don't know how we got down this rabbit hole, but
Well, no, and I think it's
wild.
really significant because it kind of goes to the authenticity of real life. And I think you point to something super important, and it's hard for me. And I think that this is a little bit of healing and moving through it to a new place on some things. So there are some things that don't feel as rattly as they used to. And
Yeah,
one of them is just honoring that it really does work for a lot of people, at least
yeah,
for now. They're still there, and it's not my job to tell them how much it doesn't work. My job is to get clear on what doesn't work for me
yeah,
and to live that out. And so it's really hard because that, this kind of happened. I know this happens to a lot of faith deconstructors, and this is kind of the essence of Down We Go. Is I had a friend that goes, I know all the things you're against, Kathy. I'm so clear on everything you're against. I would love to know what you're for.
mm,
And that was easy for me. I mean, really, a lot of what we say we're against is because we are for something different. And
absolutely.
I don't think we have to justify it to anybody. I think we can live in a place where for a while we're just like, I am against everything and I have no idea what I'm for yet. But I also think that usually there are things that we are for. And
Yeah.
I think letting people be where they're at. And so my mother-in-law is like that. And it's like, and Jose and I were actually over there last night, and she won't be listening to this, I hope, but it doesn't really matter. But the thing about was she was talking about the hope of dying, and that's
Mm,
gives her hope, like, or that Jesus could come now and release everybody, or at least Christians, right away. I'm not thinking through like what it means for a lot of other people,
sure.
like billions. But she she was saying that it's what's getting her through the pandemic. It's very
Mm,
hard. They're in their late 70s, and it's hard. And Jose said something really good. He goes, listen, if it brings you hope right now, just do whatever you need to do. And it was really good. And we were walking home. We're empty nesters now. We were walking home. We're like, hey, that was a decent conversation, because sometimes what she says is really hard for us, and we
yeah,
want to argue about it because sometimes it feels so ridiculous theologically and all kinds of politically, all kinds of things. But it's kind of like that's what she needs.
yeah.
Now that does not bring hope to me.
No.
Waiting for that any minute Jesus is going to pop us up, and so
That's not your 2020 exit strategy, no.
no, but for her it is. And so it's, and this is true for a lot of people, like watching, for me especially, watching women who live in systems that are so misogynist and patriarchal and hierarchical and just use them all the time and unvalue them. It's really hard for me. I'm like, why
Yeah,
would you stay there? But that's their story. My story, though, isn't to go, that's fine. I think the system is broken personally.
yeah,
I think it's wrong. I don't think it's biblical. I don't think it's the way it was supposed to be. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's a good idea. But I don't have to say, so you should do something. I should go, I don't think it's a good idea. So what am I going to do to model what I'm called to do as best I can. And that a
Uh,
lot of times the problem is too, we want big, or we want to create something. We don't necessarily need to make a new nonprofit or a new church or a
right.
new community. Or, I mean, sometimes
Oh
you
God,
can
kill me
just,
now.
I know, like sometimes you can just be. And, I think that we don't teach that very well either. And so
Yeah,
I think all of it kind of goes to just like being where we're at
mm,
and being comfortable with that and not having to defend it,
yeah,
and not make other people defend their decisions. But it does
yeah,
create dissonance. And what it does is like you don't have juice. So I miss juice with certain people because they really like even death, which we've experienced a lot of, not just so close to us, but also just around us. It's like that's just kind of their thing on it. And it just doesn't draw me to them.
no,
I'm drawn to the conversation like you just shared. Like that draws
yeah,
me in. I want to learn more. And it's sad, like living with this sadness that I don't have that juice with people who believe something really different, but I can still love them
yeah,
and respect them even. But I'm gonna go somewhere else to connect on it to
yeah,
different people.
yeah.
And I think that freedom to do that is good instead of wanting everyone to be like us. It's living with
Yeah.
it. We sometimes just want to create another thing that makes us feel comfortable again.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to that kind of in the concepts of spiral dynamics. I'm sure it works in most kind of human psychological development models, but it gets to the point where you kind of, on some level, you transcend this duality of like there's a right and there's a wrong, and I'm right and you're wrong, until I'm wrong and then I'll be right. But I'm always right ultimately, right? And what a coincidence! It's because it's all I know. But there's this need for everyone that's wrong to realize that I am right and become like me, especially those that are maybe further ahead of me, because I definitely don't like that idea. And those that are further behind, I really don't like that because you're reminding me of what I used to be like, right? And so
Yeah.
you definitely need to make sure that you know you're wrong and I'm right, because you're thinking I'm wrong and you're right, and I've fallen off down some cliff, and it's all this right, wrong, right, wrong, right, right.
Right.
This is the first
Right.
story in the Bible, guys. Get with the program. Um, but there is this beauty that you can be set free from, and I know that there's maybe some philosophical problematic components of letting go of all rights and wrongs and all dualities. And I agree, there are certain truths to the world. If you jump out the window, you'll go down. So I get it. Up is the opposite of down, yes. But when you're on a rock spinning through the earth, the universe, which way is up? Dualities are there and they work, but then they fall apart. And but there's this beauty of when we let go of those dualities and we just go, oh yeah, of course that's right for you. Of course that's how you handle the death of a loved one. Oh yeah, yeah, I can see how this pandemic is terrifying for you, and of course that gives you hope. The idea that Jesus is gonna, on whatever level, no matter how dark it gets here, no matter how scary it is, no matter how the government's attacking people, or 5G is gonna implant something in you, or whatever. I can see how you find hope in this part or that part, like not needing to correct, and just to go,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so glad that gives you peace right now. And on some level, I still want to add and then knowing they'll grow through it, but they might not, right? I mean,
Might
you
not.
talk to your parents, would you say they're in their 70s, you say?
Yeah.
Right? I
Well,
mean,
my
like,
in-laws, my
sure,
dad died
yeah,
a
you know,
couple years ago. Yeah.
right. Yeah. So, you got this couple in their 70s, and you're like, maybe they'll grow through that stage and become something new, different. It's possible. We all do change. But also maybe not. Maybe that's kind of where they're gonna stay. And that's okay, right? So it's fighting that need to be like, oh yeah, for this stage. And even that is like, there's still this desire for people to keep moving towards where I am. And it's like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. This is where I am, and I'll be somewhere else probably in 5 years. And that's where they are. And if they change, they don't. They change, they do. They don't, they don't. But that's where they are, and I have to, like, kind of on some level appreciate that. Right? It's like the people coming out of prison, and they did studies. I mention this all the time because I think it's so fascinating. But they put progressive churches and evangelical churches into prisons, and they looked at their effective kind of conversion rate, and then keeping people, the recidivism down, so that they stayed out of jail. And what's interesting is people that came out into progressive churches, hardly any people joined progressive churches. And when
Mhm.
they did, they didn't stay out of jail. They ended up
Yeah.
back out, in the streets doing something and then going back in the evangelical church worked really well. And so again, for Spiral Dynamics, it's like, well, you're coming out of this kind of warrior stage, it's red, and you're going into traditional, which is blue, and it's nice, and it gives you safety and certainty and security. That's going to work as a very healthy kind of next step. Stepping up into, like, let's save the whales when you were like a mob boss, that's like, we're jumping a few steps here, no wonder this didn't
Yeah.
work for you. um
Right.
and
So good. That
it's
is
beautiful.
such
It's
a good
beautiful.
illustration. It really is.
It really is, right? I mean, we it's just, it fascinates me. But if I'm all about saving the whales and whatever else that might look like, right? There's a whole host of things that in that worldview that might be trying to get people to be. It's really hard for me to go, yeah, but I get that you're a mob boss and you need some stability, but that's really toxic. It's toxic that you're believing in hell, or it's toxic that you're trying to go out and convert people on the streets, or whatever it might be. It's really hard to let go of that. It's
Well, it
not
makes
an
me
easy
think,
thing.
as you're sharing, it makes me think that the core of all of it is always control. So that we want to control our
Mm,
world and we want to control others. And that's one of the reasons why we submitted to systems, was to gain, and for sure for me, was to gain some sense of control in an out of control life. And so control, this is a core of codependency. This is why for
mm,
me everything does usually go back down to human relationships, and the 12 steps is just one framework. There's lots of other ones,
yeah,
it doesn't have to be that, but it's a decent one for just acknowledging that we hate discomfort. We
yeah,
hate it. We hate pain. We were never taught how to deal with pain. And we were taught how to cover up our pain with religion and,
yeah,
food, drugs, all the things I already mentioned. That's just how we cope. Work, identity, making something on the outside. It's all our effort to avoid
yeah,
pain.
yeah.
And
I'm feeling
so
very attacked right now, Kathy.
I oh my gosh, I hate it. I hate pain, and so learning to live with it is really hard. And this is why it's unpopular. And so this
Uh-huh.
is a teeny bit why, this is in Phase Shift and my friend Phyllis Mathis. Phyllis Mathis and I, she's a life coach and a therapist. We have a class called Walking Wounded, Hope and Healing for people who have been hurt by ministry in the church. And
Mm,
we just walk through, it's only a month, but we walk through it. And she's the one that coined this term that I use. Now it's more out there, but she said it years ago, the need to spiritually bypass. And
mm,
it was just, and what she means by that is we're just looking for a quicker fix. And it's not just spiritually in face deconstruction stuff, it's almost in anything. We just want to find something fast
yeah,
and that makes sense to make us feel better. And that can be trying to control people, it can be trying to manage our world, to find another thing to belong to, and really the worst and hardest thing is just to live with who we are and who we are in relationship with others and spirituality, whatever that looks like for people. And it's hard and it's
yeah,
lifetime work. It's like we want to kind of like nail it down before we go, and
yeah,
we're not going to. We're going to actually be asking these questions in, I think, different ways, and wrestling with something if we're growing. And some people are going to stay infusing and they're fine. They're fine.
yeah,
But it's hard because I want to go, no, you're not fine, da, 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 and learning how to let go of control and do my
mm,
story, stick with mine. But this is important. The world does need changing. There
yeah,
is injustice. So I'm really hesitant. I mean, I'm not a fan of
yeah,
just do your own work and, it's all about inner peace or something. I mean, the
right,
world is in trouble. And how is it going to change? It's by us practicing something different in the world. And that's been my
yeah,
latest project from earlier this year. It's called
mm.
Practicing Changing Yourself to Change the World. And it came out at a weird time, like 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. But I really love it. But the biggest part of it is just that there are things that we all value, and we probably have shared values, and we probably have some differences in our values
Sure,
just because of our unique way of expressing them. And I think getting aligned with our core values is a huge part of faith deconstruction and finding our way, and then really leaning into those.
yeah.
And that is, the world does need humans to change these things.
It
And
really
so it's
does.
never just for us. And that's where people are like, we just sit around a room and then nothing. No, our families change, our workplace change, our
Hmm.
systems change. And the practice of advocating is a really huge one. At least for me, like that is a really high value. So I I I want to call out destructive systems. I want to,
Yeah,
work towards racial equity and those things that are really important to me, and it might look different from another person, but it's not just for us, it is for a better world. The
yeah.
beautiful part is Christians don't have the market cornered on this. There's
No,
lots of people doing really beautiful work in all of those areas that we could learn from, and then play
absolutely.
our little part in what we're supposed to do to make those
Yeah.
changes.
Heck, some of those people are working against the Christians to make it a more beautiful world. So
Oh my
that's a
gosh.
painful truth. But yeah.
No, it's huge. And I do a lot with people who are have some form of abuse. And so
Mm,
a lot of the women's shelters, all the things, all the alliances and networks related to any form of domestic violence. I mean, Christians are the worst perpetrators of
it's really bad.
actually, which is so hard. And so
Yeah.
they're really like, I'm not sure. Most of the government agencies, I mean, we've earned a lot of love over the years
Hmm.
because we've
Got
made
to
clear to
prove
them,
yourself, though.
yeah, so that's not our gig.
Yeah.
That's not where we're coming from. No, but it's hard. We
Yeah.
have a terrible reputation in the world for
Yeah.
a good reason.
Yeah. I mean, for very good reason. We facilitate and promote in many ways those kind of things.
Right.
I'm intrigued by your thoughts on this. I'm just expecting you to have the perfect answer. Don't worry. But I'm really intrigued because you've said that you're kind of working on this kind of thing of changing internally to change the world. And I think we have a cancer in the human mind of this kind of like extreme duality where it's always us versus them. It's always this kind of like extreme duality that I think has always been within humanity. I think that's ultimately what consciousness is birthed in humanity. We can link it back in our Christian tradition to the Garden of Eden, and that's what the tree was. This idea of there's right and there's wrong, and there's you and there's me, and there's in and there's out, and all that kind of stuff. But we see it at whole nother levels right now, and maybe that's because we've become more globalists. Maybe it's because of the internet. Maybe it's who knows. But you look at Democrat, Republican, Christian, non-Christian. Whatever it is, we have these kind of categories, um, and it feels like we're just utterly incapable of having discussions, having conversations, which to me is the only way these changes will really happen, right? You can have advocacies, but you know what? You have a Black Lives Matter march on Monday, and on Tuesday you have a All Lives Matter march or Blue Lives Matter, and it just feels like we're just two groups having marches against each other, against the systems that each other is stuck in, or whatever our thinking is there. It just seems to be like this clashing back and forth. um and I'm a big fan of advocacy. I'm right there with you. I had to delete my Facebook because I was too into advocacy. I just can't get myself in trouble. I'm like, Phil, you need to stop posting things. Um, how do you see this actually playing out? Like, how do you see these internal changes actually coming to the point where we're crossing party lines, where we're sitting down at Thanksgiving and being able to move people forward in a healthy way, that presuming again that we're the right ones and they're wrong, and we need to move people in this direction, which I don't know if we can escape that on some level, right? On some level we go, well, that's not as loving as what I am, and I'm sure I've lots to grow, but I'd like you to move in this direction. Or what does it look like for you? Like, is it just we're going to just work internally and just see how it goes, or trust that the grand human project will in 100 years we'll get there, if not today? Or how are you framing that in a very real day-to-day, like changing the world? What does that look like for you?
Well, so I love practicing. I love the material, and it's been really strange, as I said, because we had such
Mm,
a tragic loss in our family right as I was finishing it, and then it came out 2 weeks before the pandemic. But I have been working on it and working it with people and running some things related to it. And the big premise there is that we're not going to solve any of these things fast. we're not gonna think there's not gonna be radical change anytime soon, but we can practice something different, and
Mm.
that it looks different from all of us, but there are some common ways that we can grow. And so practicing has 10 practices in it. And so the practices are healing, listening, loving, including, equalizing, advocating, mourning, failing, resting, and celebrating. So in it, kind of each chapter has stories and some, it was kind of like a culmination really of all the work that I had done, not just faith shift stuff. I mean, it's good for faith deconstructing people. It's not
Hmm.
really good for rigid, people who are really far right or really rigid are
Right.
not going to relate, because I'm inclusive.
Yeah.
I talk about those
Probably
things,
not
but
too many of those in your audience anyway, though, right?
and so,
At this
no,
point.
at this stage. And so a little bit for me, it was like, how do I actually live out something different? I mean, I'm out of the
Hmm.
system, or I'm loose, in a different, I'm moving in the system in a different way. How can I practice something different? And so, it's all of those things. I want to say, well, it's just listening. It's not. It's like, as we
Mm.
do healing work and get more secure in ourselves, and we can live with the tension a little bit more, but listening a huge piece. And it's really hard for me. I am super passionate about issues of justice and
Yeah.
equality, and I've lost relationships over it. And there are hills that I would die on and died on.
Yep.
And so one of the things, though, is that it doesn't mean that those people are the worst people ever. And this is this balance. So there's some things in the listening chapter that I think are helpful. And but what's interesting about him is that there's 5 principles of dignified dialogue,
Mm.
ways to hold space for hard conversations, and then story or questions that help us dig deeper into deeper dialogue. But an interesting thing about it is that those are from a frame. I mean, we're both white, privileged, resource
Mhm.
people, educated, those things. Some of those only work for people who are coming from that spot. And
Yeah.
that on the whole is the audience. I mean, I work with a lot of people who live outside and live in really hard places and struggle with really, really significant challenges of moving in this world.
Yeah.
And so, and practicing has things for them,
Yeah.
but when it really is said and done, it is a little bit for people that are kind of in this zone that want to live something different. I mean, a faith deconstruction conversation is a privileged conversation.
Yeah, it is.
So honoring that, I mean, it's really that I always think that, and I thought this for 14 years of just sitting there going, yeah, this conversation is just not going to be something that my friend who lives in a tent is going to relate to, because actually a more like your prison example is a perfect one. It's like needing something that is more clear and certain.
Yeah.
And so, or just in general, like, don't read books and listen to podcasts and have a cell phone and do certain things. But I think that a principle of listening better is to learn how to live and see each other equally, which
Mm.
is really hard when people are advocating against things that we value so
Yeah.
much. So super easier said than done.
Yeah.
But I think then kind of moving through some of the other ones, I mean, loving is, stories matter. Is a huge piece of that. When you know
Mm.
somebody's story, why they're so passionate, what's so important to them that they kind of let go of certain things, it helps. Things about including and making room for all voices and
Yeah.
different perspectives, so that you don't end up with just a new kind of homogenous group, because it's comfortable. It's just different with a twist.
Yeah.
And then, a huge, huge piece of embracing failing. It's like, we're not going to change the world. And we're not really going to change the world in a snap. We can
Yeah.
create ripples of better things. And I think that health rolls out, but toppling these big systems is going to be a lifetime of work. And I think
Yeah.
even what we're experiencing is probably embedded in us. We want fast, so we want it fast, and it's
Yeah.
not going to be. I mean, all roads kind of lead to power, in my opinion.
Mm.
And so power is just not going to say, oh, you know what, you're right, it's just not going to. And
Yeah.
so how do we sustain? And that's a piece of resting and celebrating. If I was one thing I would say related to these really hard things is that there really are a lot of good stories of working across aisles and
Mm,
divisions and sitting at tables and having Thanksgiving. I mean, even yesterday, Jose and I were like, hey, that was not half bad. And
yeah.
we sometimes struggle a lot. And I don't have margin. I mean, I'm so raw and weird and, vulnerable right now. And so I don't have room for some of that in some of the
Of
ways that I
course.
used to. And I was like, that was halfway decent. And we were able to say to her, we don't see it that way. And I don't really resonate personally with that narrative. And then that was when Jose said that. But it's a good example where we just kind of like did it, but it was little. And tomorrow's going to be QAnon or something just totally so screwed up, and it's going to make me so mad. But I have that little bit of celebrating, like, hey, we had one good conversation where we lived and it felt loving. It
Yeah.
felt healthy. And I think that actually, if we all look at it, we probably have more of it than we think.
Yeah.
But it's usually not going to happen on social media.
No,
That's the
it's
other
probably not going to
part.
happen. I deleted all my social media apart from my work kind of accounts, and it's the best thing I've ever done. I just feel so good.
It's freeing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saving the world with my Facebook posts, but you know,
Yeah.
that's really good, and I think you hit the nail on the head of the component of, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, these conversations are privileged conversations for sure. To be able to deconstruct is a very privileged position to be in, um, and yeah, to be going, oh, how do we go about change? Oh, well, it's going to take a while. It's going to this, like, on some level, that is an easier pill to swallow as a white male living in England, than it is to be a young black guy who's got a cop kneeling on his neck,
That's right.
right? That's it's an easier pill for me to swallow that this will change. Give it 100 years, and racism will be much less of a thing systemically than if I was suffering from that racism. Now we all suffer from it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's the same with, oh yeah, well, equality in the sexes, we'll get there. That's okay for me on some level. Now, I'm not saying I'm happy with it, I'm okay with it, I'm going to just leave it. But on some level, because it doesn't affect me the same way, I can swallow that pill a little easier. It doesn't change the fact that it's probably true on a lot of levels. Now, is it true that if I get involved, it might be 3 hours sooner? And if millions of us get involved, will it be 10 years sooner? Yes, I think we can really change that and shift it. And I think we should be getting involved. But I do think you're right. I think a lot of these things are so systemically ingrained and ultimately in the hands of empire, power, whatever you want to talk about, um, that we can only do what we do. And I think there is an element of just accepting and coming to some sort of peace with the very painful reality of that. But again, very privileged to not have to suffer that, because I think I'm very conscious of that as I've been certainly in the last kind of year or so really trying to educate myself, especially on race, and trying to become anti-racist and realizing, gosh, like, on so many levels this is not my problem, and then on a whole nother level this is my problem. And it's
Yeah.
a very hard
Yeah.
thing to engage with. It's
There's
really complex.
so much work to be done, and it's a lifetime of work, and
Yeah.
it won't drop out of the sky. And it is, I mean, this is the part on action. If we will never want to,
Yeah.
and if there's no cost to us, which is the truth for those of us who have a certain amount of privilege. And that privilege is different for everybody, but for
Sure.
a lot of us, we're stacked, we got a lot of it. And we're never going to want to. And so that's just kind of back to my recovery thing. I don't really need to,
Mm,
and but really it's, you do need to, you just don't want to.
yeah.
And so I think that that is a huge piece of the story, is that we're going to have to do things that we're not going to want to, but it's part of our work, is to be uncomfortable and learn, and we're not going to, we're going to screw it up, we're going to make 10,000 mistakes, and we're not going to hit it right. But our desire, hopefully, is to go, my humanity is tied up with everyone else's humanity,
Mm,
and there isn't an us and them, so we don't get to come off the hook.
yeah.
But back to, we all have unique roles, and so sometimes we just do the same thing every time. We staff, what's the highest value, what's the lowest value, where do I line up in that? And so people who are protesting or advocating a certain way,
Yeah.
they're elevated, and then the person at home, the mom at home writing some letters, it's less than, because there's all these
Yeah.
things that make it so hard. And instead of just honoring that we really do all have a part to play,
Yeah.
and knowing too that sometimes, and this is really true for people who are really hurting and traumatized, there's just a time, like, I just can't do what
Yeah.
I want to do. I mean, I'm dealing with it. I have religious PTSD and I can't barely breathe. And so I actually need to spend a little bit of time healing
Yeah.
as best I can. And then out of that healing, new things will come. And so giving ourselves a break, I mean, I feel that for sure, because I'm so impaired right now. And it's like, I want to be doing more than I can. And so and just living with that. And it feels bad.
Yeah.
But it's just my story. And this is why, I think performative allyship, and this is off topic, but it fits, because it's like we got to do it to do a certain thing on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
and instead of some of the inner work. And this is just similar. It's just humans do the same things over and over. We
Yeah.
just replicate it, and we want to be really careful that we're learning how to embody a
Yeah.
different, healthier way of moving in our world and the world.
Yeah.
And it looks
The
different for
change
all of us.
isn't a real change when it becomes this kind of like this veneer, like it does need to become an internal change. And I think the long-term changes are the ones that are embodied, we see it again and again. And I think like, I think of like, the old cathedrals. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in the UK, and we've got these buildings that are like, 1,500 years old, but some of them took like 100+ years to build. And so you've got people that were like, they started, the architect that drew up that building, his grandson didn't even see it finished. It was his great grandson that finally, or whatever. I
I
mean, it's like,
know.
or you see the guy that like was laying the first few bricks, like they move things forward. There is a building there because of it. And actually it's really significant because of the ground building. Like, you want the bottom to be really good, right? You can get away with a few sketchy bricks up the top, but you really want some good ones at the bottom. And there's this thing of like, if you're just playing lip service, if you're just making it look good for now, right? If you like get that bottom to kind of look good, but it's not actually really doing its stuff, by the time you're dead and on, we're relying on that. We're trying to move and build on these things, and I think there's something deeply profound and beautiful and good about helping people do that inner painful work that we don't want to go near. I don't want to deal with this. I felt I've been feeling such exhaustion and malaise going through COVID. I feel like I'm walking through treacle, and I live like a great life. My life is fine. My life is wonderful. I got nothing going on really. And yeah, just feeling like I'm just, just crawling through treacle. It's just like, what is going on? And that's just some COVIDness going on, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
the
global
world's
trauma.
2020, right? And yet in the midst of that, then being even more brought face to face with my racism, with my issues, and going, oh God, I'm gonna have to deal with this. And I'm like, oh, and finding the balance of going, no, I'm gonna do this work. It's hard work and I want to do it, but find the balance of going, okay, but have some grace for yourself. You're still working, you're busy, you've got this going on. And so figure out your line, push to it, and then go, okay, now take a day off, go for a walk, hang out with your wife, come back, pick it up again tomorrow.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. But yeah, I think what you're doing, I mean, right from the beginning, well, maybe not the beginning, but early on, these groups of just going, hey, we're going to get messy and we're going to deal with some stuff, and it's going to come to the
Mhm.
surface, and people are going to be upset about us doing this. But you know what? No one in this group is going to be upset that we're doing this, because we're going to be
That's
better off
right.
for it. Like right from that original kind of messy dynamic of like, no, this is going to be good and it's going to be great. You're still doing it. And I love that. I love that that's just the heartbeat of what you're doing. It's the heartbeat of the refuge. It's the heartbeat of what you're writing and putting out there. It's really beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm aware that we are going. And so how can people connect with you if they want to kind of connect?
Yeah, the best way, I mean, I'm weird right now for sure, but the best way is just, I have a website, kathyescobar.com. So, I mean, I've been writing there for years and years, but it has more information on the books I've written and
Sure.
Facebook. I'm on Facebook, and I mean, I'm the worst Twitterer. I'm on Instagram, but I do put some stuff out, and I do really care about connection. I mean, that's
Sure.
my number one thing, is just somehow, so even meeting you, I mean, this is really true. Like, I'm really out of it. I hadn't seen your work. So now I have a resource for people.
Yeah.
And so that part's really important. And so I would just say, go to the website,
Perfect.
kathyescobar.com. Some of the stuff is kind of, you get a good picture. And I do have a group. It's on break right now for 2 months, but we'll be back. It's on Facebook. It's Space Shift Hope and Healing. And it is a closed group. So it's not an open group. It's not a huge group. And I try and nurture content in there that is
Perfect.
specifically for people that really want to engage a little bit more. And it is not like open posting. It's kind of curated, but it's smaller. And always, if someone's like, I just need a little bit more like intimate,
Yeah.
it's a decent place for it. But it's been a weird year for me. Right before we finished, though, I walked through the 5 rhythms of grief, and we do stuff like that. I'm probably going to do in the fall, practicing for faith shifting folks, like just looking at those 10 practices through that lens.
Yeah.
And so, and I just do a video, people comment, there's places to share and stuff, but it's not like you don't get 10,000 memes or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the best place.
Perfect. So that's a closed group, but it's not hidden or anything. People,
It's not
if
hidden.
I
You
can
have to ask
post a
to
link and they
join.
can, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't just add people. Like, you have to answer questions because I want to
Awesome.
keep it safe enough. And I'm vulnerable in there. I don't like just random people,
Yeah.
coming in. But it's been good. I've really loved
That's
it. I
wonderful.
love the people, and I have a new project I just want to mention because it's just such a
Please.
2020. Like, what the hell, 2020? But I have a project coming out for Advent, and it is called A Weary World. Reflections for a Blue Christmas. It's coming out September 22nd, and it has 4 weeks. And so it's Advent, so it has Christian, framework in there.
Mm.
But with all the stuff we've talked about, I mean, it's
Yeah, it
all the
sounds great.
unknowns. And so it has 4 movements. It's 7 days, 4 weeks, and they are honoring reality, practicing honesty, embracing paradox, and borrowing hope. And so it's basically 7 reflections on those themes, but it has
Beautiful.
practices and group discussion questions. And I really like the way that it came out. It helped me write a little bit more about loss in this past year, but it's really
Mm.
just for how tired we all are. And some of these things we're talking about, like how to just navigate truth of our
Seriously.
story, and we're weary, so it uses "O Holy Night," but I'm looking forward to it getting in the hands that just feel weary.
Yeah.
And
I need to pick
again,
up a copy.
you know and for faith deconstructors, I will say, like, some of it, but it's not, trust me, it does not have Bible all over the place, and it doesn't have that, but it has a lot of wisdom teachers. But it's for Chris, it has Christmas
Sure.
Eve, God with us. And I do want people who are tired to be a little buoyed. And if you're like
Mm.
me, like, I can't do most Advent resources. Like, it's hard for me. And so
Yeah,
this one was kind of created out
that's
of,
cool.
us being able to connect with the truth of our stories.
That's beautiful. Wow. Well, Kathy, honestly, thank you so much for taking such a huge chunk of your day to chat, to connect. I
Oh, it was
loved meeting
fun.
you. It's
Oh,
fantastic.
it
What
was
a great
so fun. I love
conversation.
making new friends, and I had
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
coffee with you this morning from across the pond.
Perfect.
And so, yeah, stay in touch,
Of
and
course. Yeah.
appreciate the work that you're doing, and always,
Mm.
for everyone out there hurting and struggling and finding their way and finding freedom, that is like, oh my goodness, we are not crazy. We're not alone. We are in good company, and in better and better company as the
Absolutely.
years
More
go
and more.
by. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, absolutely. I hope you make me feel lazy. I tell you, the list of things that you're doing, the books that you're writing, you're just prolific. You're just going. Um,
No, no, no,
I
no.
love
It's just,
it's wonderful.
yeah.
Resourcing
No.
so many people in so many different places with such great resources. That's a beautiful thing. I'm
Long
really,
haul. It's over the long story. It's
there you
not
go.
short
That's it.
bursts.
No,
Well, it's
thank you
great
very
meeting
much.
you. Have a good
Anyway,
rest of the day.
all right. Love you. Catch you
Bye
later. Yeah.
bye.
Bye.
Yes, take care.